Ladies and gentlemen, can I give you a very warm welcome to this evening's webinar, which is being run by CAFRE, AFBI and AgResearch in association with the Rising Costs Industry Task Force. And tonight we're tackling the very, very important topic of optimizing nutrient use efficiency. Now, a little bit more of that in a moment. Just to start off with, for some housekeeping, you're automatically muted on this webinar. If you wish to ask questions, and please do, use the Q&A function and not the chat box. If you do have any issues, leaving and rejoining usually fixes them. The webinar will be recorded and will be available on YouTube, CAFRE and AgResearch YouTube channels at a later date. And would also kindly request if you could complete the feedback survey at the end. So why is nutrient use efficiency so important? Well, organic manures are a very valuable resource on our farms, and they're increasingly valuable due to the rapidly increasing price of manufactured fertilizers in recent years. Fertilizer use accounts for around 20% of greenhouse gas emissions on our beacon farms. So actually reducing, making better use of organic manures and reducing the use of artificial manures through manures and legumes is a win-win for the farmer and the environment. Tonight, we have three speakers. First up will be Aveen McMullan from CAFRE, who'll be talking about improving nutrient use efficiency. Our second speaker is Suzanne Higgins. It'll be a video presentation on the comparison of agronomic performance of different fertilizer formulations, including liquid fertilizers. And finally, Robert Patterson from CAFRE will be discussing clover establishment. So with that, I will stop sharing and hand over to Aveen to do the first talk.
So nutrient use efficiency is the relationship between the nutrient supply to a crop, be it a grass, a cereal crop, a vegetable crop, or a forage crop, and the nutrients removed from the field when that crop is harvested. When considering nutrients supplied, we are referring to the nutrients from all sources, including the breakdown of crop residues and organic matter held in the soil reserve, and any livestock manures and chemical fertilizers that are applied and then taken up by the crop. Our output then is the crop yield. That's the tons of grass grazed, silage or grain harvested, and also the quality of this produce. So nutrient use efficiency is an indicator of how efficient this whole process is, and that and our aim is to maximize the quantity of nutrients taken in by the plant and converted into plant material. So if oversupplied, nutrients won't be used by the crop and can either be leached as nitrate through the soil profile or lost to the atmosphere through gaseous emissions, such as ammonia or nitrous oxide. Or they can be carried in surface runoff and again lost to the environment. There's also a portion of nutrients that will bind to the soil particles and will be locked up in the soil. Therefore, it's important, both from an economic and an environmental aspect, for nutrient use efficiency to be maximised. And as Jason said, with high fertiliser prices, we want to utilise as much of the nutrients that are put onto the crop, make every granule of fertiliser count, and also maximise yield and minimise any environmental harm. Next slide, please, Jason. So what are the benefits of improving nutrient use efficiency for your business? Reducing nutrient loss from soils and manure means more nutrients are available to support crop and grass growth, resulting in yield and quality. There are also potential savings on inputs when through reduced need for inorganic or chemical fertiliser, and time and money can be saved through only applying nutrients where and when they are needed. And by reducing losses to the environment, you're reducing the risk of environmental damage and the risk of any breaches of regulations occurring. Next slide, please, Jason. So what actions can you take to improve nutrient use efficiency on your farm? Building soil fertility should be the starting point for all farming systems. Soil is your biggest asset. often undervalued, but if you look after the soil will provide for you. Making the best use of organic manures, be it slurry, farmyard manure, poultry litters, or digestate, can be an efficient way of supplying nutrients. Using cover crops and legumes can replace the need to supply nutrients, and Robert will tell us about this later on this evening when he talks about clover. Using technology, adopting precision methods of applying nutrients, and ensuring accurate and effective application can push efficiencies that wee bit further. And this will be covered in next week's webinar. Next slide, please. So, when we talk about building soil fertility, there's nothing new here in what I'm going to say. It's really back to basics. If you don't know what's wrong, you can't put it right. So your first step is to do a soil analysis to identify the pH and the nutrient status of your soil, and to identify anything that could be limiting nutrient uptake. Soil analysis is simple, it's cheap. For those farmers in County Down, the eastern portion of County Armagh and the south of County Antrim, they are all part of Zone 1 of the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme and will soon be receiving results from samples taken over the winter period. The other areas of Northern Ireland will be sampled in due course in year 2, 3 and 4 of the programme. So I would encourage anyone in the programme to make use of the results that they receive. The second step then is to use the information provided by the soil analysis to develop a nutrient management plan. This can be used to identify if you need to apply lime, how can you make best use of manures across the farm, how much fertiliser do you really need, and it's all about matching inputs to crop demand to achieve grass growth. So help is at hand. The crop nutrient calculator provided by CAFRE can help you to create a nutrient management plan for your own farm. It's available at Deer Online Services and you can access it using your Gateway account. And one recent development has been that for those farmers in that Zone 1 of the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, their soil analysis results will now be pre-populated on the crop nutrient calculator. So when you access the calculator and go into step 1 of the process, all that field information will already be entered and you can proceed on to the further steps. So that makes it a lot easier to use the calculator and to create your nutrient management plan. So next slide. So factors that are affecting nutrient use efficiency, and looking at soil health, having a healthy soil with good chemistry and well-balanced nutrients, good physical structure, and an active population of soil organisms or biology, all working together will obviously improve nutrient use efficiency. In the past, we focused on the chemical element, but the other two, the physical and biological elements, also play an important role. pH also plays an important role in nutrient use efficiency, and both these factors will influence how nutrients are taken into the plant by the root system and the efficiency with which the plant converts those nutrients that are taken up into crop biomass. Next slide, please. So good soil structure allows plenty of air space between the soil particles, facilitates water infiltration and supports good biological activity, and therefore promotes the breakdown and recycling of nutrients. Poor soil structure, on the other hand, can be caused by compaction or poor drainage, and this will limit root development and the ability of plants to access nutrients held within the soil, thus preventing that uptake. So taking care to avoid travelling on soils in wet conditions and excessive trampling by livestock will reduce compaction And you can see compaction there as the limiting layer in the photographs, both high up and lower down in the soil profile. Poor drainage, waterlogging of ground, either as a result of soil type or compaction issues, will again hinder root development. So addressing drainage in mineral soils and maintaining existing drainage networks will help alleviate this problem. pH also influences soil structure. The use of calcium lime will increase flocculation and will help to open the soil up and increase the movement of air and water through the soil. Weather conditions at the time of application will also influence uptake of nutrients. Granular fertilizers need to dissolve and enter the soil, come in contact with the roots of the plants. And waterlogged soils or heavy rain can also lead to rain off and loss of important nutrients. Next slide, please, Jason. So looking at pH. So pH, as I'm sure you know, is a measure of acidity. And with the neutral being the value 7, and then our soils generally would lie in that region of 5 up to 6, 6.5. The pH scale is a logarithmic scale, and if you just hit the button there again, Jason, you'll see that, you know, if we look closely there, the difference between a pH of 5 and pH of 10 is 10-fold. So quite a significant difference between 5 and 6, or between the individual units of soil acidity. And what I want to point out here is that, you know, some farmers will say, oh, my soil is pH is 5.8, it's close enough. But it's not really, because when you consider that that's an average across the field, you could have areas of the field sitting at maybe pH 5.4 and 6.2 in a full range, and your average of 5.2. So the difference in those areas can cause quite a significant difference when you look at it on the logarithmic scale. Next slide, please, Jason. Looking at the relationship between pH and nutrient availability. If you focus on the diagram there, the wider the bar, the greater the availability of the nutrient, and conversely, the narrower the bar, the lower the availability. So if we look at where the pH is sitting around 5.5, you can see that nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, all of the main nutrients are tailing off. However, if you move up into that 6 to 6.5 region, you can see that they're all much more available. The bar has widened out. So the plant needs more than just nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It needs a balance of all nutrients, the major nutrients and the more micronutrients as well. So as pH drops, that influences the availability, and all of the nutrients are less available at lower pHs. When it comes to optimum, just stay on that slide, please, Jason. When it comes to optimum pH, we recommend a pH for mineral soil of 6 for grassland and 6.5 for arable. So that's the optimum. But when we look at it in terms of target, where do we want to be? And in terms of our target pH, we would be saying raise that pH to 6.2 for grass and 6.7 for arable. So you want to be 0.2 above the optimum. That's the target that you want to be at. And when you look at your soil report and it provides you with a lime recommendation, that lime recommendation is calculated to allow that 0.2 above optimum for target. pH also ensures a correct balance of all nutrients across the spectrum. Next slide, please, Jason. So what effect does soil pH have on fertilizer utilization? Again, if we look at the lower end of that, the pH ranges there, 5 to 5.5 and 5.5 to 6, you can see that nitrogen is less efficiently utilized, and around half of the phosphorus is unavailable. So when you apply a chemical fertilizer, half of it never reaches the plant. So it doesn't. So the importance there is to get the pH up into that 6 to 6.5 range, where you have the potential to utilize 100% of the fertilizer applied. And we can see there the monetary value of that lost or wasted fertilizer. With looking at applying 2744 at today's price of £730 a tonne. If you were to lose, overall 32% of your fertilizer at a pH 5 to 5.5, that's £129 lost. We estimate that across Northern Ireland, 64% of our soils that have been sampled are below that pH of 6. And the results coming through the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme will give us new data on that, and I hope that that we can report a higher percentage of soils in the optimum as the scheme progresses. Next slide, please, Jason. So moving on then to making the best use of organic manures on farm. This is a valuable resource on all farms when it's available. And we want to maximise and improve the nutrient efficiency of manures. So when applying manures, the aim is to achieve the most efficient nutrient management through better application and management of manures and reducing any nutrient losses. So to do that, you should time your applications to coincide with periods of rapid growth. Instead of rushing out this week with slurry, it might be better just to sit back and consider, will I get the most out of this resource? Now, I know in a lot of cases, slurry tanks might be sitting a wee bit full, but if you can wait, you should consider, has grass growth started? As soil temperature increases, grass will take off. Also consider is rain forecast, and ask, will that slurry be where you put it in a week's time, or will it be washed down into the hollows of the field? It's important to use low emission slurry spreading equipment, as this reduces nitrogen emissions and improves nutrient availability by placing slurry in contact with the soil. And remember to observe buffer zones around waterways, because again, we want to keep that manure and that fertilizer in the field. Next slide, please, Jason. So just a few statistics here. RBD 209 states that around 70% of nitrogen ingested by cattle and sheep, as both as conserved grass and feed, is excreted back out onto pasture. So during the grazing season, this nitrogen is returned to the soil. According to Technologist, 60% of phosphate and 90% of potash is recycled in the grazing sward. On the other hand, every tonne of silage, every fresh weight tonne of silage removes around 1.7 kilograms of phosphate and 6 kilograms of potash. So next slide, Jason. So if we look at that a wee bit further and we take some silage yields here, so looking at first cut, a first cut of 10 tonnes to the hectare, 15 tonnes and 23 tonnes, and we're talking fresh weight here. You can see how much phosphate and potash is removed in each case. So a 15 tonne to the hectare yield there would be the equivalent, by my calculations, and I hope I'm right here, would be the equivalent of about eight bales to the acre. So it's sort of fairly moderate to average yield there. But just remember that the silage is completely removed from the field, and that these offtakes of phosphate and potash should be replaced. Next slide, please, Jason. So looking at that 15 tonne of silage yield, removing 26 kilograms of phosphate and 90 kilograms of potash. If you're applying a 6% dry matter slurry, every cubic metre of slurry will provide a kilo of nitrogen 1.2 of phosphate and 2.25 kilograms of potash. If you're applying 11 cubic meters to the hectare, and that's the equivalent of 2,000 gallons to the acre, you'll be putting back 11 kilograms of nitrogen, 13 of phosphate, and 25 kilograms of potash. Now that's 11 cubic meters per hectare, just in case I said that wrong. That's 1,000 gallons to the acre. So if you double that up to 2,000 gallons to the acre, you'll be able to replace the phosphate that's been removed, but you'll be a wee bit short on the potash, and you should remember that, and at some point through the season replenish that either using muriate of potash or some compound fertilizer. So that's just a wee bit about matching, you know, the nutrients that come off the field and matching them with nutrients supplied back on again. And I know a lot of farmers last year, with the increased price in fertilizer, maybe held back from buying fertilizer, but you know, it's important to realize what's taken off, and that should be replaced either with a manure or with a chemical fertilizer. So next slide, please, Jason. Just want to cover a wee bit about liquid fertilizer, just to explain what we mean by liquid fertilizer, because I feel there's a lot of confusion out there, both you know, in the marketplace and on farms about liquid fertilizer. A liquid fertilizer is a suspension of nutrients held in a liquid form. It's similar to a granular fertilizer that is applied to the soil, and it's taken into the plant via the roots. It's not a foliar feed. I'm going to talk about those in a wee minute, but this is a specific product here. It's normally a nitrogen containing product, but it can be nitrogen sulfur or nitrogen phosphate and potash and sulfur. It's delivered to the farm in bulk and therefore requires on-farm storage, and it's not really that common in Northern Ireland. Very, very few users of liquid fertilizer in Northern Ireland. Next slide, please, Jason. Now, foliar feeds, on the other hand, these are products that can be bought in you know, a range of sizes of drums, and they will supply a range of nutrients and trace elements. They're normally a liquid product added to water and then applied to the crop using a conventional sprayer. This time they're applied to the leaf and they're taken into the plant through the leaf. So that's the distinct difference between a liquid fertilizer and a foliar feed. Just moving on then to the advantages and disadvantages of foliar feeds. As I said, there's been a lot of chat about using alternative fertilizers when the price of chemical fertilizer went up, but it's important to remember the advantages and the limitations. So we've had a few dry summers, and again, foliar feeds are good in dry conditions because you can get it onto the leaf, get it absorbed quickly into the plant. They're a useful way of providing trace elements, particularly the arable crops, but maybe even to grassland crops as well. And as I said, they can be applied using a conventional sprayer, and they'll give full coverage of the full field as well, because on the headlands you're spraying right out to the field boundary. The disadvantages, however, is that, you know, there's a limited quantity of nutrient that can be applied in one application. There's a significant risk of leaf scorch in dry weather, and a lot of damage can be done to a crop with foliar feeds if they're not applied correctly. You need to have leaf there for the nutrients to be taken into the plant, so you have to allow some regrowth, and it can be difficult to meet all the nutrient demands, particularly in grassland. So next slide, please, Jason. So a few others just to mention. You know, there's anaerobic digestate products out there. You hear a lot in the press and at different presentations about biostimulants. There's liquid seaweed and humic and fulvic acids are all out there on the market. There is a place, I would say, for all of these products if and when they're used correctly. Biostimulants, liquid seaweeds, and the humic and fulvic acids all provide a carbon source and also will be very good for the biological activity within the soil and have been shown in some instances to improve that activity and therefore improve the recycling of nutrients within the soil. The one warning I would give is that a lot of these products, yes, they're on the market, but have they been tried and tested? Have they a proven track record? And indeed, have they got a label? Have they been tested? It's a market that's really quite unregulated at the moment. And until there is some regulation there and some standards set, some of these products may promise more than they can deliver. So my warning would be, whether it's an anaerobic digestate, type product or any of the others, if you're dealing in this, ask for a label, ask for an analysis, and ask some questions rather than just taking word that it's good for the crop. So that is me finished, Jason.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Aveen. We're going to take questions at the end, but anyone please do, you can put in questions at any particular time. That would be great. I'm just now going to share the next presentation, which is a recording by Suzanne Higgins from AFBI, who is going to talk about some research that she has done on liquid fertilizers. So just 2 seconds.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Suzanne Higgins. I'm a soil scientist at AFBI. So this evening I'm going to be giving a short presentation on the findings of some experimental work that we have done at AFBI. So there are many different fertilizer products available, from granular products, compounds, fertilizers with inhibitors, there's liquid fertilizers and foliar applications. And often we don't know if there's any real difference in the performance of these in terms of for the same nitrogen input. So I'm going to present some work we have done at AFBI comparing some different fertilizer products. Now, we have done limited work on liquid fertilizers. So until recently, liquid fertilizers weren't widely used in Northern Ireland as a nitrogen source. And there's just been increased interest recently. And just in the last few years, we've done a couple of very small trials looking at liquid nitrogen. And I'm just going to present some of the findings of this work this evening. So we're comparing the relative agronomic performance of some fertilizer products. Okay, so in this particular experiment, this is the way we would do an experiment such as this. We would do it on a silage field, perennial ryegrass, and we would lay out experimental plots. So they're usually around 2 meters by 8 meters, and we have a number of treatments then that we compare. So in this particular trial, we had a number of liquid products. So we had liquid urea, and we had also granular urea. And then we had a couple of liquid fertilizers there was additives in these. So these are commercial products, so I can't give the exact composition of these. But I know that these two liquid products, liquid A and liquid B, they had gibberellins in them, which are growth hormones. They promote plant growth. So we looked at those compared to ordinary liquid urea. We had granular urea. We also had some granular CAN in there just to compare liquids to a granular product. And then we had granular urea with agrotane. And there was a few other products in there too. So these were all applied at the same nitrogen rate. and we followed the advice of the fertiliser company that asked us to trial these products. So it was their advice how much we should apply and when. Yeah, that's just the granular products that were included. So in these two liquid fertilizers, so liquid fertilizers often and other fertilizers often have certain additives in them. And these particular products we had contain gibberellins, which is a plant growth hormone, which stimulates growth. And the idea with this product is that the company designed it so that it would be applied early in the spring and it would promote that early spring growth. So for example, sometimes when we have a cool spring, soil's still very wet, it could sometimes take the grass a bit of time to get going. But these particular liquid fertilizers were designed to kind of stimulate that growth. If, say, for example, you needed grass out for grazing cattle, for example, and you wanted some early grass. So we applied these in April, and then we cut the plots 3 weeks later. So there was a first application, and we cut 3 weeks later. Then we didn't apply again, but we cut a further 3 weeks after that. So we only applied them once. And then we had a couple of cuts after that just to look at the yield and the nitrogen uptake. So this is the way we would have our experiment laid out. We have our grass plots, and then we cut using a harvester, and we collect samples of the grass. We measure the yield, and we look at the nitrogen uptake in the grass. So in this experiment, we were comparing nitrogen use efficiency of the different the granular and the liquid products, and we were comparing the yield relative to one another. So this is the results of that first cut. So this was 3 weeks after we applied all these products. And the bar graph here, the 2 bars in red, this is the yield of the 2 liquid fertilizers with the gibberellins added. So the yield of the plots receiving those liquid fertilizers were actually significantly higher than for the granular products. So in those 3 weeks, there was more grass growth on the plots receiving the liquid products compared to the granular. The granular products, all of them, there was no real difference between them. So there's no real difference in yield between the CAN or the urea or the urea with inhibitor. And there was also no difference between the liquid urea on its own with granular urea. The only difference was the 2 products which had that the gibberellins added. And that boosted the growth. So those 2 products were giving around 42 kilograms of dry matter per kilogram of nitrogen applied, whereas the granular product was only given 15 kilograms of dry matter per kilogram of nitrogen applied. Okay, so this was 3 weeks. This is in the first 3 weeks after application. Then we didn't apply any more, but we left them and cut 3 weeks later. So this is the growth 3 weeks later. And the middle 2 bars, the red bars, that is for those 2 liquid products. So at that second cut 3 weeks later, the yield was actually a lot lower for those liquid products. So they had a really a large yield in the first 3 weeks, but then the yield dropped way off, and the granular products actually yielded more in the second 3 weeks. So this shows that with those liquid products, it was that liquid nitrogen was used immediately. It was used very, very quickly as soon as it was applied. The first 3 weeks after it was applied, the grass made use of it and there was good growth. But after that, the growth fell away and the granular products actually yielded more. And this shows that the granular fertilizer sort of persists in the soil longer and the nitrogen's released more slowly over time. So then if you look at over the whole 6 weeks, over the yield over the whole 6 weeks, then there was no real overall yield difference between any of those products, between the granular or the liquid. So the liquid fertilizer was used immediately after it was applied, but once it's gone, and there was no further yield benefit, whereas the granular product, it was more of a steady yield over those 6 weeks. Okay. So that first trial showed us that those particular liquid products give very rapid, immediate boost to growth. And that's what they were kind of designed to do by that company, and it was boosting that early spring growth. So this is the result of that specific product. Now, not all products will work in the same way, and they're not all designed to work in the same way either. That particular product had the gibberellins in it, and it was designed to give that boost in growth as soon as it was applied. But there's other products out there that wouldn't have those. Like the ordinary liquid urea in that trial, it just gave a steady growth, the same as the granular product. It was only in this particular product here with the gibberellins in it, it did give that immediate boost, and then once it was gone, it was gone. So then we did another trial it was the same company a couple of years later. So they were producing these products and we were just testing them out. So they asked us to do another trial a couple of years later. And there was a slightly higher nitrogen rate applied per application this time, and they asked us to apply it twice. So in the first trial we did, we only applied it once in April, and we didn't apply it again, whereas this time we applied it in April, and then we had another application 28 days later. So it was a longer cutting interval this time. We left in 4 weeks between cuts, and we're just comparing to see what would happen if we applied it twice. So again, it was a range of liquid products. Now they give us a certain a number of products. They didn't tell us exactly what was in them, because obviously, commercial confidentiality, they were developing these products, so we didn't know exactly what was in them, but they had a number of additives, and we were comparing with ordinary granular products. But it was the same idea of the gibberellins, where we would boost growth. So again, we applied in April, then we left the plots and cut them 28 days later, and then we had another application this time and cut again another month later. So this is the way, so because these are foliar, they're liquid fertilizers, so we apply when the grass is short. So before we started the trial, we actually topped the grass off, and then after the first cut, it was applied again. So you're applying whenever the grass is short. So there's some liquid fertilizer goes into the soil and some goes onto the grass. So it's different from a foliar product where you'd be applying more to the leaf when there's maybe longer grass there. This product you're applying when the grass is short. And again, it was the same regime of having it in plots and cutting it using a harvester. So this is the results of the second trial we did. The plots, the circle there in the middle, those bars are for the liquid products, and the ones on the right are for the granular. So in this second trial we did, the granular product actually did better than the liquid product. We don't know whether this is because we left a longer interval with cutting. So we only cut after 4 weeks, whereas in the first trial we cut after 3 weeks, and we didn't maybe pick up that immediate burst of growth. So that burst of growth may have happened very quickly in the first couple of weeks after the liquid was applied, but because we were leaving it longer, we didn't pick that up. And then by the time we cut, actually the granular product did better the second trial we did. So in summary then, the message is that there's so many products available, and they all contain different additives, different compositions, and they're designed for different purposes or applied different times of the year. So the results that we have here may not be not every fertilizer would give the same results that we got here. This is a very limited work that we have done, and you have to follow the guidelines of the company producing the fertilizer, whether it's designed for that very early application to boost early growth, or whether it's designed for more similar to a granular product where it gives steady growth over the season. You have to kind of be careful what you're buying and look at what it's designed to do. So liquid products, what we have seen is they are taken up very quickly but then once they're gone, there's very little residual nitrogen left in the soil, whereas a granular product would dissolve more slowly over time, so you get a more steady growth with it. But we obviously need to do a lot more work on this. We don't know exactly what's happening there. But then overall, we found, even though the liquid product give that burst in growth, overall, when you look at your total yield over the year or over the months, there's very, very little yield, total annual yield difference between these products. So overall, I don't know if there'd be any like overall benefit, but obviously every product is different, and you would need to do a lot of trials on these before you could make those kind of conclusions. So what we're doing now in AFBI, we are doing further work on liquid fertilisers. So we have a trial we're looking at compound fertilisers, and we have some liquid fertilisers added in that. So we want to look at yield. We also want to look at emissions. So we don't know if the liquid maybe there's more nitrogen lost from the soil through leaching, or there could be more nitrogen lost up into the atmosphere as gaseous emissions. So we don't know this at the moment. But this is some work that we're starting now, and hopefully in the next few years we'll be able to give some results of those. So this is where we're at with liquid fertilizers, and generally we find very little overall difference in the annual yield of a lot of these products between granular or liquid products. So I think they are quite comparable in performance. Okay, so thank you. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to help.
Note that Suzanne recorded that remotely, she wasn't able to attend tonight, and I'm now going to hand over to David Patterson to present. Sorry, Robert Patterson. I'm confusing you with your uncle, to present on clover establishment.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yes, good evening, folks. My name is Robert Patterson, and I work as a dairy and technologist based in Greenmount campus. I suppose specifically working with the dairy herd there. I suppose my remit for this evening is just to give a bit of a case study into the CAFRE dairy herd, and how we have gone about trying to establish white clover in the swards there in the past season, and how that has gone. So I'll just run over a brief background of clover. I'm sure many of you know more about it than I do. We'll touch on how we selected the fields at the college to try the establishment. We will talk about the selection criteria for those fields. Then we'll talk about the establishment methods that we used. We'll look at the performance and how we actually got on, and then we'll summarize any lessons learned and what we've learned for next season. So I suppose in terms of clover has been around for a long time in ruminant livestock systems, and the benefits are well known and have been well proven. And I suppose it has been to the detriment, particularly maybe of the dairy industry over this past 10, 20, 30 years, that the clover concentration in grazing swards has decreased, potentially with increasing stocking rates and the increased reliance on nitrogen fertilizers. So in terms of clover, again, the benefits are well known. So yeah, clover, those studies down in Chugga showing a reduction from 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year down to 150, and in some cases on their Solihead farm down to 0, and showing small decreases in total dry matter yield of potentially 0.6 of a ton, with a complete reduction in nitrogen fertilizer. So I guess, look, we're seeing two benefits there. Obviously, we're seeing very strong economic benefits in our pocket, especially at the minute, but there's also huge environmental benefits there. I suppose coming from the production of those fertilizers and the associated emissions, and also the emissions that are caused through spreading that fertilizer on the land. Animal performance in terms of the dairy scenario, there's evidence there to show increased milk yields and also increased milk solids, both from the increased quality of the swards with the clover inclusion and with the higher protein contents, and also the increased dry matter intakes. So in terms of CAFRE, Just to outline our scenario for those who aren't familiar, it's a 180 cow dairy herd, 8,500 litres roughly, autumn calving. So in terms of our grazing, we're out early in the spring and we have a fairly high grazing demand straight away. In terms of our grazing block, we're quite fragmented, but I suppose our core grazing block there is 36 hectares. So in terms of core grazing, that's area that's not cut for silage, potentially maybe one rotation of surplus bales coming out of some of those paddocks, but in the main, those fields are grazed all year round. So when we thought about clover inclusion, we thought, well, let's focus on this area. Why did we pick 1/6? 1/6 worked out as about 3 paddocks, 6 hectares, and I suppose we thought, well, the clover, the benefits of the clover plant. So obviously the clover plant is a legume and it has the ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen and convert that into a form of nitrogen available for the plant. However, after establishment, we're looking at 12 to 18 months before that plant is actually able to establish that nitrogen. We're also looking at reduced levels of nitrogen going on to that sward over the course of that season. We're trying to establish it. So potentially we're looking at slight reductions in dry matter yield across that first year. So weighing up that consideration of slightly reduced dry matter yield for that first year and our high grazing demand, we felt 1/6 of the platform a year was a good place to start. And as many people know who have a history or experience of trying to establish clover and keep it within the sward, it's an ongoing process and it's not a one-hit fix. It's a slow and long process that needs to be chipped away at every year. So we felt that was a good place to start. Our aim then was to reduce the amount of nitrogen going onto these swards and maintain our dry matter yield. So ultimately, we're looking to try and reduce the amount of nitrogen going onto these paddocks by 100 kilos per hectare per year over the next couple of years going forward. Next slide, thank you. Just some of the key fundamentals then we sort of came across and learned about when trying to establish clover. Timing is critical. We figured that out fairly early on, and that timing, I suppose, is built up of 3 things. It's built up of we need adequate soil temperature in there. Obviously, clover grows at a slightly higher temperature than grass, so you're looking at over 8 degrees for clover, whereas perennial ryegrass is around 5 to 6 degrees. We're looking at adequate amounts of soil moisture there for germination, and we're also looking for daylight hours. This daylight hours is a big one with clover. And for that reason, we sort of said, look, our cutoff date for trying to get this clover established and in the ground is going to be the 1st of June. So any time really from that last week of April through the month of May, with the idea being that we're going to have good temperature at that stage, we're still going to have good moisture, and we're going to have a long period of the growing season left with suitable daylight hours before the onset of the autumn. The danger with leaving that into June and July, we risk losing our soil moisture. And if we leave it into July, August, potentially September, we're losing out in those daylight hours and really affecting the establishment of that plant before the hard winter. Also important in our selection criteria was looking at paddocks with less weeds. Weed competition is a big one, as clover safe sprays are hard to come by, and managing the weeds in a clover reseed is very difficult. There's no 2 ways about it. So if we can identify a field that is clean of weeds and we're not going to stir up too many weeds, that's going to be a big advantage. Again, Aveen's covered it well, but just in terms of the nutrient action plan, we should have one of these carried out for all our fields, and these fields that we're establishing clover on are no different. It's important to have good soil fertility to try and be able to establish clover, and it's also important to try and maintain that fertility going forward. So just to bear in mind that it's critically important for these fields as well. And also just a point there about measuring. So at the college, we're quite fortunate. We've a good few years of grass measuring going back on the grazing platform. And over the last number of years, we've been quite detailed in recording our fertiliser use in those fields as well. And I suppose it's important, yes, we can see the evidence in the literature for the savings that can be made there in terms of nitrogen application. But I suppose unless we have those figures for our specific fields on our farms, and we know and we can see that we're able to reduce our fertiliser use and we're still getting that growth, well, the proof is in the pudding, and each farm is going to be different. So it's really important that we measure that on an individual basis. Next slide, please, Jason. So yeah, just again, selection process. We picked out 3 fields, or 3 paddocks, sorry, that constituted our 6 hectares, and what we needed in these 3 paddocks, or why they were chosen. So their soil pH was all 6.3. Clover is more delicate and more susceptible to, or is more it's more critical to have the soil fertility right. So it's very important to have that soil pH optimum there. The soil P and K indices were also good. They were 3s. These were paddocks that had very few weeds in them historically, and we knew that wasn't going to be an issue. We also looked at the history of the sprays applied. Some of the non-clover safe sprays can have a residual effect in the soil, which could affect germination. So we looked at that as well. It was important to look at the performance of the existing swards, the proportion of perennial ryegrass in those swards, and if they were swards that we wanted to keep. And also we looked at the amount of nitrogen that had gone on to those swards so far that year. So looking at the amount of grass competition these clover seedlings were going to have. So the establishment method we went for in these swards was broadcast. In terms of how we went about that, so one of the fields, I should have said, we established all these clover swards in the week beginning the 23rd of May. The sort of 10 days previous had been fairly wet. It was fairly wet that week as well, but we got a few windows. One of the paddocks we had picked out was just ready for grazing, so it was around 3,000 kilos of dry matter to the hectare, and we took the decision that to try and get that ground cleaned off as well as possible, we would pre-mow that sward, we would put the cows in the same day, and we would go in with the seed straight after. The other 2 paddocks actually had missed grazing the week before, and because of the weather, the surplus grass hadn't been harvested yet, so they had covers just slightly over 4,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare. So we saw this as a good opportunity. We thought we'll go in, we'll mow these paddocks out good and low, and we'll be able to remove all that grass and take it off the paddock, sort of serving 2 purposes: one, to help to open up the base of the sward, and 2, that we were going to be removing a certain amount of nitrogen away with those bales that we were taking off, so helping to decrease the grass competition on the seedlings as well. So the picture in the middle here, sorry, is just a close-up of the paddock that was pre-mowed and grazed. So you can see it was fairly clean, and a nice sward for putting seed into there. In terms of sowing the seed, it was important that we did it as soon as possible after grazing and taking the bales, so as to decrease that competition from the grass. So within 24 hours of the field being grazed or the bales being taken, the seed had been sown and the gate was closed. We used a broadcast method, as I said. The machine we used to do this was a springtime harrow with an air seeder on top of it. We felt it was important to try and minimize the amount of excess soil disturbance, so we say, that we created to try and minimize the amount of disease or weeds that were germinated. And so to this effect, we angled the tines of the springtime harrow up as much as possible, so they're really only ruffling the surface of the soil. We sowed white clover on these swards. We sowed it at a rate of 2.5 kilos to the acre. And the variety we used was AFBI, which is a medium-leafed variety and recommended for grazing. As well as the pHs being around 6.3, we also added a small amount of prilled lime onto the surface as the seed was sown, to provide a readily available form of lime to aid establishment. And there was also some muriate of potash or 0060 applied as well, in line with the nitrates action plan, again to aid establishment. I should have said we did roll these fields directly after as well, trying to increase the amount of seed to soil contact. And as I say, within 24 hours, the gate was closed. In terms of post-sown management, we felt that was probably the most important part of the procedure. So looking after these swards throughout the rest of the season was critical. We aim to graze these swards every 18 to 21 days after they have been grazed. And what this meant was grazing these swards at lower pre-grazing cover. So we were aiming for 2400 to 2600. The idea being to try and reduce the amount of competition from the grass and maintain as much light getting into the base of the sward as possible. You'll see in the photo here, this was a photo taken just at the first grazing, and many people looking at that would say, well, those seedlings are very fragile, they're going to be very susceptible to being tramped on. And yes, that is true, but we felt that it was better to perhaps lose a few of the seedlings at this stage through that way, than lose all of the seedlings because they were completely smothered out and weren't receiving any sunlight. The tight grazings continued for the rest of the season, again to try and maximise the establishment and get as much light into the base of the sward as possible. After that first grazing, there was no nitrogen applied, again to limit the growth of the grass. And then after the second grazing, nitrogen was applied at a half rate. So there's 13 kilos of nitrogen per hectare applied for 3 grazing rotations after the second grazing. In terms of autumn management, it was very important as well. We're an autumn calving herd, and our grazing demand greatly decreases going into the autumn. So there was a large batch of ewes put across these paddocks, I suppose, in a mob style system. They were on for 2-3 days max, and they were on in mid-November to try and get these swards grazed out and let light into them over the course of the winter. Next slide, please, Jason. Yep. So quickly, just in terms of performance, you'll see the photo on the left. This is a photo of one of the paddocks for our rectory before its third grazing after being sown. And as you can see, a good proportion of clover leaf there in the canopy. The middle photo is that same sward a day later after it was been grazed, and you can see down in the base of the sward the clover starting to spread out across there. However, it didn't all go to plan, and we're not going to sit here tonight and tell any lies. The photo on the right is a photo of one of the other paddocks that we tried. This is a photo again before the third grazing rotation, and truth be told, I was doing very well to find that clover seedling in that paddock. You can see around that clover seedling, there's a small bit of dead material there as well, and I think this was the paddock that was baled beforehand, and our thoughts were that would try and open the sward up. But I think there was probably too much dead material in the bottom of the sward, and we were fighting a losing battle from the start. Next slide, please, Jason. Yeah, so in summary, our lessons learned. Thankfully, the one paddock that did do really well contributed to about half of that area, so about 3 hectares. So I suppose in summary, half did really well and half was a bit of a flop. However, we're not completely disheartened. We knew this was going to be a learning curve. We knew that to be able to establish and keep clover in the sward, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of skill, and a lot of care with those grazings. I suppose going forward, we've learned that we're going to have to take a bigger consideration of sward density, and look at those younger swards that maybe haven't become as dense in the base of the sward. We have looked at this broadcast method of establishment this year, and potentially going forward, one way to tackle these denser swards better would be to use a machine that was going to stitch the seed in instead of just leaving it on the surface of the ground. I suppose we were thinking that this broadcast method was going to be able to be a good system for all our grazing platform, but I suppose looking at the requirements that we need for this broadcast system, and that we need really good soil fertility, that we need zero weeds really, that we need a low sward density. Perhaps not all of our grazing platform is going to fall into these categories, and perhaps there is going to be a need to have a bit of full reseed in there as well to try and establish clover in some of these swards. Our plan for 2023 is again to go again and establish another 6 hectares on the platform. Again, keep our timings where they were last year, and try and use the 1st of June as our cutoff for that establishment. Prioritize the timings of the grazing again. And I suppose there's a number of things in the grazing there. You know, we need to be flexible. We need to be able to get on early in the spring to be able to graze tight in the spring, and adjust our nitrogen applications accordingly. So I suppose there's a message in there that before you're a good manager, you can be a good manager of a clover sward, you need to be a good manager of a grass sward. And I suppose going forward this year in that paddock, that 3 hectare paddock that has done quite well, we're going to be looking to try and keep that amount of clover in the sward, and reduce the amount of nitrogen that's going on to that paddock this year, as those white clover plants start to fix their own nitrogen from the atmosphere. So our plan there is to go on as normal with the first 2 nitrogen applications of the year, and then I suppose from that the start of May onwards, look to going half rate on those paddocks to ultimately reduce the amount of nitrogen going on to that paddock by at least 100 kilos over the hectare per year this year. That's the end of my presentation, and take any questions.
Thank you very, very much for that, Robert. A very interesting presentation, and again highlighting the fact that clover management, I agree completely, requires good grassland management to start off with, but then a whole different set of skills on top of that. And no, it's not all simple and easy. It's a lot more complicated, but the rewards are definitely there. So we're now going to open it up to some questions, and they are starting to come in now. So Aveen, can I start with you? Are the values given for slurry NPK content a fair estimate of all slurry, or does this vary a lot, e.g. between houses for calves getting a lot of meals versus cows only on silage? Would there be any benefit to testing slurry, and are there any services that do that?
Yes, Jason, the figures that I used are taken from Orbi 209, so they're standard figures. And the example I used was 6% cattle slurry. Those values will vary depending on the type of livestock, the diet that they're fed, and so on. So to get into the detail, yes, we would recommend that you do some slurry analysis testing. Although I would warn that testing has to be done, with a representative sample, which can sometimes be difficult to get. But maybe at the time of application, when the tanks are well mixed, that's maybe an opportune time to take the sample. Of course, there's a risk, health and safety risk around taking samples, so bear that in mind if anybody's taking samples. And to get the sample tested, there's a service provided through the Dairy Direct offices, similar to soil analysis. So if you call into any of the offices, they'll provide you with a sample bottle, a request form, and a sample bag. And same as soil analysis, just pop the sample into the envelope, take it to the post office, and post it off. We use NRM labs, and they will get the results back to you then as soon as they're available.
Okay, next question for Robert. Robert, what about trying to stitch in clover into silage swards after first or second cut?
Yeah, I suppose it depends on your timings of the silage. Well, it's going to depend on a number of things. I suppose first cut is going to be more ideal than second cut, because you'll still be able to get it in that May time, as we talked about with the timings. The second cut, you're probably running on a bit late into the season. Other considerations are the amount of residual nitrogen that's going to be in that sward after your first cut. If you have potentially gone on there with a fairly heavy dose of slurry, and followed up with your nitrogen, there's going to be a certain amount of residual nitrogen in there. So if you're not burning that sward off, and you're trying to establish a clover there, you're going to probably have a fair competition from your perennial ryegrass that's left there. And I suppose it depends on those other factors as well. Is it a sward suitable for a clover? So does it have a good does it have a good proportion of perennial ryegrass to start with there? What's the sward density like? What's the soil fertility like? All those factors need to be considered as well.
Thank you, Robert. A question here for Aveen. During your presentation, it was noted that a crop of silage at 15 tonnes would remove a certain amount of P and K. The P was mostly replaced by the slurry, however, there was a deficit of K. If soil sampling prior to the growing season indicated that P and K were at optimum values initially, can granular K still be applied to the sward after silage has been removed to cover the deficit?
Yes, Jason, even at optimum P and K indices, the recommendation given for silage is to apply a quantity of phosphate and potash to maintain a maintenance stress and to maintain those indices at those optimum levels. So really you're just replacing what's taken off and not building anything into the soil indice. So yes, there's no issue with applying granular P and K afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Then another question for Robert. You mentioned that you put in medium-leafed clover into your grazing swards. Someone here is asking, what about putting large-leaf clover into grazing swards? Is there a reason for not doing that?
Yeah, I suppose typically larger leaf varieties have been more dominant in silage swards, with medium leaf varieties more suitable for cattle grazing swards, and I suppose that the smaller leaf variety they're more typically seen in sheep grazing swards. But look, if we're getting clover into the sward, no matter what variety, it's a bonus. But yes, for grazing, medium leaf varieties are normally more common.
Aveen, there's actually a very relevant question here from Gary Morrison. Gary Morris actually on the order of putting stuff in. So he's saying he's soil tested, needs low pH, so needs to put on lime, but what order and why should be putting in his lime and his fertiliser? Because I know there's restrictions on fertiliser and lime and how one should work with the sequence of that.
Yeah, good question. And if I've got this right, the right way around, it's slurry first, and then leave about 7 to 10 days before liming. If you put the lime on first, you really need to wait maybe about 3 months before so best to get the slurry on first.
And doesn't the same apply for urea? Isn't that right? I think there's a
yes, and urea as well. Slurry and urea, wait that 7 to 10 days. Can is okay. There's no restrictions with can.
Okay. There's a question here for Robert. Will the half rates of nitrogen you were proposing to put on not reduce end fixation by the clover?
So we're going with the half rates of nitrogen. Is the question about the first season, sorry, or the second season?
I'm guessing it's the second season. It just says half rates of nitrogen not reduce the end fixation.
Yeah, well, look, the more nitrogen you put on, the less nitrogen you're going to fix. I suppose it's a trade-off there, where we're still trying to maintain a high level of grass production. Yes, there's some of those studies have shown that reducing nitrogen further, you can still you can still get the same amount of dry matter yield. But I suppose we're maybe playing it a bit safe there, and our target is to reduce by 100, and putting that nitrogen on will get us there. So yes, potentially if this goes well, then yes, you could try and push it further.
Okay. Aveen, question for yourself. For tackling compaction in soils, is an aerator roller or a subsoiler better?
Well, I'm probably not going to say either one or the other. I'm going to answer that question by saying, every soil is different. And, the first course of action before you bring out any machine should be to get the spade out and to dig down and see where that compaction is within the soil profile. Is it close to the surface? Is it deep down? And then also be mindful of the conditions when subsoiling, because subsoiling can do more damage than good if done incorrectly. So it's that assessment's important, and then pick your machine after that.
Okay, thank you. A question here for Robert. Does the type of clover make a difference to the amount of nitrogen fixed in the soil?
That's a question I haven't actually heard before. It's not something that I have come across in the research. I suppose we look to the list of recommended varieties of clover as we do with grass. I'm not sure if that's actually something that's measured or recorded, or I'm aware of.
Yeah, actually, funny. I was at a sustainable foragers conference in London for Christmas, and it's actually something they're just starting to breed for now. Believe it or not, the grass breeders have never actually measured it before now, so it's a good question, and you think it would be done, but it's actually not something that's been done hitherto now. Let's see. I've got another question here. Aveen, do slurry additives make much difference to any difference to nutrient availability in slurry?
That's a wee bit outside of my field, to be honest, Jason. So yes, there's all sorts of selling points around, slurry additives. Certainly is a big push from the emission side. But yes, there's some merit in nutrient availability and helping that soil biology as well, just making nutrients more available.
Okay, and then a final question for Robert then. What about the use of red clover in silage swards?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some great results coming out of studies there as well for that, especially down in Chugga's Salahead farm. Absolutely. There's a few things to bear in mind though. Red clover is quite a temperamental plant, both on its cutting height and the sort of soil structure. It doesn't like compaction. Red clover silage can be quite difficult to make in that it needs a longer wilting period. Um, the it's fairly simple to manage across the main bulk of the season. So your first, second, third cut. It's the fourth cut which can be quite difficult. If you can't get enough time to get it wilted, it's quite a poor forage. If you put livestock on there, you can have issues with sheep and fertility issues. And if you put other livestock on there, potentially calves, you could have poaching effects that's going to damage the persistency of that sward as well. So yes, there's huge benefits there if you can get it established and get it to persist. But there's some big challenges there as well.
Indeed, there are. And one final question, I'm not actually just sure who's the best one to ask this, but it is an interesting one. When reseeding, is it advisable to spread chemical fertilizer before the seed is germinated, or should you wait until after the seed has germinated?
Timing's everything. So it is really, chemical fertilizer is fairly readily available once it's dissolved and down into the soil. And really what you're looking for is when that root development starts, that you have those key nutrients, you have your phosphate available to encourage root development. So, again, depends on soil types, depends on weather conditions. But you certainly want to have those nutrients available when that seedling, is pushing down roots, forming roots, and getting into that sort of to boost that early and initial growth.
Okay, well, I think that'll do us for this evening. Time's getting on. Can I thank Aveen and Robert for their talks tonight, and Suzanne in her absence who pre-recorded her talk. I'd also like to inform you that if you are on the BASIS scheme, you can get BASIS points for tonight's webinar. Just send in your registration number to us and we'll make sure that you get the necessary accreditation. Also to remind you then that there is a second webinar at the same time next week, and we'll have 3 speakers, Ronan and Cole from CAFRE, who'll be talking about the use of innovative technology to aid the efficient use of nutrients. We will have Richard Kane, a very well-known cereal farmer from the North Coast, who'll be giving us his experience of using those precision technologies. And finally, Kieran Hamill will be discussing steps to improve nutrient use efficiency in your business. And that's at the same time next week. If you haven't already registered, you can do so through the CAFRE and the AgResearch websites. And finally, just to remind you all, if you could please fill in the feedback survey, which will come up automatically at the close of the webinar. So thank you all very, very much for joining us here this evening, and we hope to see you again next week.